Exciting stuff. Wow, everybody, thanks for joining us. Yeah, give yourself a round of applause. It's almost lunch. We're almost there. Woo. All right. Well, of course, this will be the most exciting conversation of the day because you know what we're not talking about. We're not going to have an ordinal debate today, but maybe a little bit of background. Introduce myself, Pete Rizzo, editor of Bitcoin Magazine. Here we have Giacomo Zucco, needs no introduction, technical developer in the space, known for creations like RGB and other platforms and innovations, and someone who I was excited to discuss this because I'm an avid follower of your work and you're someone who's contributed to my understanding of Bitcoin. And you know, where Giacomo's and I's work really, I think, comes together is we both are students of Bitcoin as a culture, right? Understanding what Bitcoiners want, what users of Bitcoin as a software are trying to achieve through Bitcoin, and where they're having agreements and disagreements. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the Ordinals protocol is that it's become very divisive, right? But I think we would agree that, you know, debating Ordinals maybe isn't the actual debate. There are actually underlying factors here, conversations we're trying to have with each other that we're not able to have because we're distracted by the wizard pictures and the monkeys that are clogging up our nodes.
Totally agreed. Yeah, Ordinals were just an excuse to,
right.
An occasion to bring out different visions for the protocol, for competition of idea, for trade-offs, priorities.
Right. So I was going to set the stage a little bit there and say, you know, in my mind, as I think about Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is trying to achieve and Bitcoin maximalism, I think Ordinals has exposed a bit of a fissure in the culture that was maybe there before, but that we didn't notice it. And I think, you know, there are a certain group of Bitcoiners who think that Bitcoin is perfect the way it is. Bitcoin is sound money. Bitcoin has found its utility in that use case. That use case is advancing over time because the price is maturing and adoption is maturing. And that's the way it should stay. It is the way it is, right? And we've had notable speakers who, you know, at this conference before who have agreed here never to attend this conference again because that is what they believe. And I think there are some Bitcoiners who look at what's going on in the larger cryptocurrency ecosystem, seeing Bitcoin as part of that, and they see Bitcoin as sound money, but they also see it as programmable money. They want it to actually compete against these other use cases in the cryptocurrency market. I'd say they have a sea to shining sea, manifest Bitcoin, we must conquer the land. So they see the cryptocurrency market as something to subvert, to attack. You know, in Ordinals, I think is a great example of this because what is it trying to achieve? It is actually trying to bring the NFT marketplace to Bitcoin. So curious your thoughts on that framing.
I agree there is a divide along these lines. Maybe you represented the second side a little bit too charitably, and the first one in a way that could be oversimplified. For example, many Bitcoiners think that Bitcoin is not perfect by any means, but that one of the fundamental characteristics of Bitcoin is its ability to resist change, resist takeovers. So this ability is more important than the specific feature or the specific efficiency of sound choice. So the idea is the fact that Bitcoin cannot easily be subverted is the thing we must protect, even if it's not perfect. So we have to act as if it was perfect in the sense that the most important thing by far is resistance to subversion. Right. And so it's not that it's literally perfect, it's just good enough that we should prioritize conservation of the fundamental characteristics over improvement over time. Especially because many of these people, including me, think that we still can have improvement. Like when we debate ossification of the protocol, that doesn't mean ossification of Bitcoin. Think about the internet. The fundamental layer of the internet stack, IP protocol, version 4, didn't evolve at all since the 80s. But on top of it, the internet changes dramatically, like the browsers are not the same, use cases are not the same, TCP is not the same, HTTP is not the same, all the apps are not the same. So the idea is there are some core things that when you touch those, like consensus rules, especially maybe consensus rules about inflation, those things are like the fact that they
sacred cows.
Yeah, if we go back in time and we can suggest Satoshi some changes, let's just go nuts about changes. But since we have these, even if they are not optimal, we should never put them in any kind of crisis. And about the second group, of course, they want to compete, they want to take over, they want to drive everything to Bitcoin, but sometimes there are less noble motives. For example, there is a motive of the fact that you can just be one of millions of Bitcoiners, or you can just be the contrarian that will take any new excuse to create some drama and some visibility. So you can also have some explicit mandate to subvert Bitcoin. So there is this adversarial conspiracy theory, which is not completely unrealistic, that some of the proposed change to Bitcoin are explicitly engineered in order to subvert something.
Well, this was a bit different, right? This wasn't a proposed change. This was a protocol that was released that didn't require any changes. And I think one of the biggest contributions of Ordinals might be that it didn't ask for permission, right? It simply just launched and it allowed the market to weigh in on this conversation. But I'm curious to go back. Obviously, this dynamic of thinking about the other cryptocurrency market outside of Bitcoin. Do you disagree with the premise that maybe we should actually be trying to subvert some of these markets and bring them back to Bitcoin? Because you think about things like stablecoins, right? That is actually a part of the market that used to be on Bitcoin. It has now moved to the cryptocurrency sphere. So do you disagree that as a culture we should aspire to try to bring those use cases back to Bitcoin?
Yeah, fundamentally yes. I think that I think that most Bitcoin maximalists, they are not trying to bring these use cases to Bitcoin because they think that most of these use cases are inherently stupid. Not just because the use case themselves may be stupid, but because even when they make sense, they will make more sense on a centralized database. So most of the cases that we discussed, including stablecoins, will just work perfectly as a Google spreadsheet. The only reason you need blockchain magic is to scam people. That could be a noble attempt, like you want to scam regulators. So let's say I want to issue a dollar credit unit. I can do it on MySQL, but if I do it on MySQL, the regulators will ask me to become just like PayPal. If I say blockchain, I will use this cargo cult magical thinking, and I will scam regulators.
Let me give you a harder one. So earlier this week, we saw there was a project that formed, and it's embedding information that was classified and released by WikiLeaks onto Bitcoin through Ordinals. Okay, so they're using that to preserve information over time in a way that perhaps would be more difficult. So who's getting scammed in that situation?
Well, the fact that you said ordinals and not just inscription, like you can just write stuff on Bitcoin. That happened with Satoshi, with the Genesis block, with the image of Bernanke, with a lot of things. So you can just write stuff. There are a lot of debates about that being not optimal, but you can do it. I did it for my daughter. When my daughter was born, I used the Eternity Wall app to write a welcome to my daughter on the blockchain.
Okay,
so
I did the same. I have a picture of my daughter on the blockchain.
I polluted the blockchain. But ordinals are not that. Ordinals are an attempt to create the gambling dynamics on top of that. So instead of just writing stuff, you are associating some Satoshi, like unfungible Satoshi,
so you would say
to that.
The WikiLeaks logs are...
They don't need ordinals. They can just, they don't even need Bitcoin. They can just use torrent, multi-replicated torrent, IPFS, an onion service. They can do a lot of better things.
You don't buy the fact that the Bitcoin, because we know the Bitcoin database will be there in hundreds of years, that there's value putting that information there.
No, I do think there may be some value into information persistence, but not on stuff like entire WikiLeaks leaks. Maybe a timestamping, maybe a magnet information connecting to a torrent file. So the Bitcoin really sucks at being used as a database because it's not designed for that. It's terrible for that. We have way better ways to do that, including torrent, and we may need some information to be preserved, like an onion address or a magnet, and then we put that on Bitcoin. It makes sense. But to put an ordinal dynamics on top of that, so to make it tradable, the only reason you do that is because the incentives to gambling are more important to the underlying narrative. So when we say, let's do privacy coins, some people may be interested in privacy, but most people will just try to trade the sentiment on privacy to make money, to make a quick buck. And the funders, they will try to print money to fund their team and to fund their Lamborghinis. Same stuff with this. You can just print stuff on Bitcoin if you want, but you create an ordinal, because in that way you think that there will be a speculative bubble around it, which is actually the real objective, in my opinion, on many of these projects.
Well, and I think some of the people who advocate for ordinals from a Bitcoin maximalist perspective will simply just say speculation is the way that people have adopted Bitcoin. I think yourself, you've said that speculation is the gateway to Bitcoin, and I think we've seen that in the past. And some people, I think, would just argue, look at what's happening in Ethereum, these other coins. People are coming, they're participating in these markets, but they're doing the same user behavior that we are. They're spending this Ethereum, they're saving in this Ethereum, and maybe even their mentality, their HODL mentality, is very different. So in this case, Ethereum has used this use case to acquire users. Those users are benefiting their economy. Why can we not conceive of adopting similar tactics?
Well, because Bitcoin is characterized by some goals that are in antithesis with fiat world. Like we try to avoid centralization, which is the characteristic of most of these projects. These projects work because if something goes wrong technically, there is a central team, a foundation or a leader that can just tell people how to change consensus arbitrarily. So centralization is one thing. The other thing is that like Bitcoin is about reverting to a model of, I mean, part of Bitcoin, not for everybody, but part of the even a very early elaboration about Bitcoin is about reverting to a sound money concept, where you have a low-time preference, where you don't go around try to spend money because money is just transforming into shit. So you try to save, you try to think for the future, and this gambling frenzy, even if it has been a gateway to Bitcoin for many people, is actually in antithesis with that. Consider another thing. Bitcoin as a culture of verification and of disbelief and criticism and skepticism. So in Bitcoin, even if a great actor like, let's say, Blockstream, Lightning Labs, they put up something that is not entirely accurate, friends and fellow Bitcoiners will absolutely eat them alive because it was not perfectly accurate. That's atypical in the market, because in the normal market, if you have a firm of spaghetti and on the packet there is like the tastiest of all, and that's not rigorously true, nobody cares. In Bitcoin, if you just do something which is not exactly true, people will get mad. Crypto is not less so. It's exactly the opposite way around. It's like more fiat than fiat. In cryptocurrency, the culture is let's just exaggerate with any kind of claim. The more outrageous we get, the more attention there will be on the token. So in many regards, crypto is not just not exactly Bitcoin, but it's the other way around. It's like, this is fiat, this is Bitcoin, and crypto is like an immune reaction of the fiat world to Bitcoin. So it's like the anti-Bitcoin, the way that fiat sees Bitcoin. So we should not take it over. We should just basically win so that fiat will die, including crypto, which is just an immune reaction within fiat.
But don't you feel at some point that's pushing us to be, and I think this is the criticism from more of the Ordinals camp, is that Bitcoiners have essentially collapsed into being some sort of moral police, right? Essentially, we're going around and we're saying, this is the best way to do things, and we're unable to accept alternatives. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that really, I thought was interesting about Ordinals, say I buy an NFT on an Ordinals. Really, technically, I'm just acquiring Satoshis, and I'm acquiring data associated with those Satoshis. So what I've done is I've overpaid for that Bitcoin, right? I've now acquired some Bitcoin, and I have some useless data. Maybe that will go to zero forever. But I have Bitcoin, right? I, as a user, have acquired Bitcoin. And so to what extent is that valuable to the network, right? Do they have to believe, does someone have to believe that they're using Bitcoin for the right reasons to be a valuable user? Because I think more and more it sounds like what we're saying is that we want people to adopt Bitcoin in a certain way.
I think that adoption that comes through this kind of roundabout ways is very weak adoption that will be scared away easily when the fact that the narrative they used to adopt it was not true fades away. I mean, there are two arguments here. The first one is that not every kind of adoption is necessarily good. For example, if you have chain analysis companies trying to de-anonymize users, spying on users, and they see Lightning, now they want to do attacks on Lightning privacy, so they will buy Bitcoin to create channels to perform basically probing attacks. So now they are buying Bitcoin, they are helping the liquidity of Lightning Network in order to de-anonymize people. These people are adopting Bitcoin, but for the exact opposite reasons we want Bitcoin to serve us, so to reduce privacy of persons.
But can we really expect every end user of Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin for the sound money thesis? Does that scale to 8 billion people?
Well, do we have to scale to 8 billion people? I mean, if somebody needs hard money and private money on the digital world, they have Bitcoin. If they don't need it, if they don't want it, my thesis is that they already have fiat. Like, if you want cheap money, if you want printing money, if you want centralized teams, you already have the fiat world. The world is yours. We are the niche that are creating the alternative.
But that's not, as a culture, that's not what we're saying. We're actually saying that fiat money is a great societal evil and that it's morally bad, and therefore you should adopt Bitcoin. So you can't then defend that argument by saying, oh, okay, well, if you don't like what Bitcoin does, or it's not going to scale to 8 billion people, it's okay to use fiat currency. That, to me, strikes me as contradictory, because essentially you're using the same logic to argue two different points.
No, it's the difference between like an imperialist belief that wants to conquer everybody and, you know, the Amish community. I mean, we think what you're doing is evil.
So you want to be the Amish community.
We want to be left alone. We have an alternative. We have a plan B. If we are right, you will just burn in hell very soon, and we will be the only one left. But if we are wrong, I mean, be my guest and use fiat all the way. But don't try to bring your stuff on our Amish community. We are just Amish. We like it.
Right. Okay, but so you don't sympathize with the people who say, okay, maybe not everyone's going to get this right away, but maybe over time they can become convinced. I'll use myself as an example, right? I wasn't someone who would initially maybe adopt Bitcoin for some moral reason. I come from a privileged, U.S. background. The financial system works for me, and it wasn't something where I immediately understood the revolutionary societal implications of Bitcoin and then even identified it. I was agnostic about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for years. It took me a very long time to identify it. So if users are going to take a very long path to Bitcoin, but eventually they're going to assimilate the values. It sounds like some of the times when people argue, they're saying, oh, we can't have speculation on Bitcoin. What they're saying is, like, we don't think our values are ultimately going to win. If you think you have better values ultimately, shouldn't we encourage people to do those things and just realize that they're going to win out, right? Ultimately, our point is so well defined. Our values are so much better that they'll beat these other values. So it doesn't matter if we get people to use Bitcoin for this facetious reason.
I mean, ultimately everybody's free, so there is no proposal to act violently on anybody. But as far, well, no, you're right. There may be some Bitcoiners that will say Gary Gensler will kill the Ordinals, which is something I would not condone.
There are people who are actually calling the state to enact violence against proposals like Ordinals. That is 100%.
Yeah, okay, that exists. I am completely against that. But as far as freedom is concerned, we can welcome you when you discover the ideals behind Bitcoin. And I mean, when you changed your mind about Bitcoin and crypto, we were very welcoming, I think.
You were much nicer to me after that.
Right, right. You entered the Amish community, you grew your beard, you started to build your farm, and then everybody was happy with you. The point is that we don't have to pretend to accept something we don't believe in.
But what are you disagreeing with? So in the case of me buying an Ordinal and overpaying for my Satoshis and then getting my random dog picture, like, what about that activity is so objectionable to you? That I've overspent on the Bitcoin? Like that?
No, for example, for me, buying shitcoins is not really a moral problem. You are just, by definition...
But this thing that I'm buying is Bitcoin. It is actually, like, I can spend it as Bitcoin.
Let's say you're buying an entertainment service. Somebody telling you that this particular Satoshi is unfungible, which is not technically true. So you're buying... It's just, if you buy
is it fungible or is fungible?
It is fungible. Okay. Satoshis will be destroyed in every transaction, and new ones will be created. You can create arbitrary connection, first in, first out, first in, last out, but this is completely arbitrary. More than that, Satoshi will move within the UTXO without spending, through routing or everything else. So the idea of non-fungible Satoshi is completely broken from a technical point of view. But if you believe in it, for you, that's true.
But I'll always be able to have that wallet. Let's say I have my Ordinal in a Sparrow wallet. That Sparrow wallet is always going to recognize that there are 10,000 Satoshis there.
Only if you believe that, because, for example, from the outside, I see...
But that's just how wallets work, though.
Well, there are some objective realities. For example, you can create a UTXO in your wallet, and from the outside I see that you're still controlling it, but now this UTXO is a Lightning channel, and you're moving stuff within, and I don't know, and I think you have these tokens, but you don't. And maybe I will prefer to use a first in, last out heuristics to connect. Let me give you this metaphor. You have gold. You know that people are basically minting gold into other coins. They are melting and minting it. And I look from the satellite like these tracks of gold coming in and out. And based on some arbitrary heuristics, I say this atom of gold is the same of the track that entered. That's not true, but since I cannot know, I would just make an heuristic up. If many people believe that, that becomes internally true as like a shared delusion. But that's not what is happening
technically. So the argument then that Ordinals teaches us to accept things about Bitcoin that are not necessarily true.
Yeah, and are even harmful because they will reduce privacy for everybody. If you think that there is an objective infungibility and non-fungibility between Satoshis, you increase the amount of on-chain heuristics that people can use in order to try to anonymize. For example, I see a blockchain transaction. Now I can try to argue that since this Satoshi is rarer, then this must be the change, and this must be the payment, because this cannot be. So you're increasing the amount of on-chain heuristics. You're reducing privacy, basically, for yourself mostly, but slightly also for everybody else, because privacy is a collective issue, unfortunately. But my point would be that you buying that NFT is not evil for me. Maybe you know that it's bullshit, but you think it will go up in price, and so you're just giving a honest signal to the market. I think that this will go out. My issue will be with shilling that, or with promoting that, or with misguiding people into believing that. So for me, promotion is more annoying than buying. If you want to buy, like for example, you think that people will freak out for COVID, and you want to buy masks. You think it's stupid, but you do it. Or people are becoming all new age hippies. They will buy crystals to cure cancer. And maybe you're a doctor and you say, well, this doesn't make any sense. But if people that really want to cure cancer with crystals, I will buy crystals. That makes sense from a speculative point of view. But if you write an article explaining that actually crystals do cure cancer, I'm very skeptical about that.
Let's talk about RGB for a second. So you have worked on a protocol that allows people to do similar things to Ordinals. Would you agree with that statement?
In a way, I will.
Sorry, someone using RGB potentially in the future could issue a project that might look like an NFT.
That's correct.
Okay, so why is that not something that is being used in the market? Why do you feel comfortable advocating for that, knowing that it has the same effects, or might have the same effects as Ordinals would have?
Some of the effects, not others. But anyway, the history is Peter thought as an idea, client-side validation. This idea is good for Bitcoin, and we care for Bitcoin. Implementing this idea on Bitcoin directly is probably impossible. So we think about experimenting with this idea with other tokens. And in every
What's the idea again? Sorry,
client-side validation.
Okay.
That's RGB, basically. Yeah. So basically, in order to get funding and to experiment on stuff, we say in any public occasion, I start presenting RGB in Lisbon in 2018. You still see the video. And I say, OK, this doesn't make sense. I mean, tokens don't make any sense. But we want to experiment with this cool technological vision, because in future we could...
If you don't think they make sense, why would you have made a technology that allows them?
Because this technology eventually will allow us to scale Bitcoin on client-side validation. We will have eventually, I hope, RGBTC. And that's what we are really caring for. In the meantime...
what will RGBTC be?
Bitcoin represented on RGB. So you see a transaction on the blockchain that doesn't represent a real Bitcoin transaction, because it's the second layer, basically. It requires a two-way peg, which is this holy grail that we don't know how to achieve. So it may never happen. But the model is cool, and we want to experiment. In the meantime, my point in Lisbon was, if you really want to scam people, at least don't pollute the blockchain. So that's the difference with ordinals and inscriptions. If you want to pollute people if you want to scam people, at least do that in a nice way. For example, do that in a way that increases privacy, like ordinals decrease overall privacy. RGB increases it, because now you don't know if this transaction is only transmitting Satoshis, or is also including the single-use seal for RGB tokens. So the heuristics are getting destroyed by RGB, not improved by RGB. So the effects of people scamming people are beneficial. Also, when I say scamming, I not always mean something bad. Like scamming regulators, as I said before, is good. If like you have Nazis and you are hiding Anne Frank and you scam the Nazis, that's good. I mean, it's a good kind of scam. So scamming the SEC, scamming the Federal Reserve, it's good. They are violent actors. They are trying to prevent us from moving money. Let's scam them. So if you want to use blockchain Wu to do a stable coin in order to avoid KYC on the secondary market, go for it. But if you want to scam your users, so if you are doing an ICO where the purpose is not to scam Gary Gensler, which would be great, but it is to scam the grandma that is going to buy this token and get poor, That's the moral issue.
So as the creator of this standard, what outreach have you made to the Ordinals community? Have you, and why have you taken that approach?
So basically, the idea of RGBs comes way before the Ordinals. And when we see that...
Right, but I'm saying that because we accept that the users of Ordinals have a similar interest, potentially, to the users in RGB.
Let's say the users of NFTs has the similar interest. So in Lisbon, I said, OK, maybe you can use RGB for art and this kind of NFT. I'm skeptical. I think it doesn't make any sense. You should just use a database. But if you really want, let's use RGB. There are some nice things to RGB about that, for example. In RGB, you have to pass peer-to-peer a data load, which is not on-chain. So you can pass the picture directly. If you want to give me a monkey or a zombie or whatever these crazy things are,
right from media.
You should just actually give me 2 megabytes of image without polluting the chain. That's great for NFT. It's even good because, in a way, you can sell images that are secret. While with other protocols, you have to publish the image, so everybody has a copy, and you just have to pretend that this copy is special, which is not. In that case, with RGB, you can actually keep secret an image, and I give it only to you. It will just become public when you give it to him, and he gives it to her, and so on. It will just spread out. But so it can be nice. My thesis was, do you need RGB for that? No. You can use MySQL. Would it hurt for you to use RGB? It wouldn't. So we talk regularly with the NFT people, like the people working for Diba and the Bitmask, and they do RGB. They do NFT on RGB, and we are happy. I will not buy it. In Lugano last year in October, there was Federico Tenga issuing an NFT on RGB. And Peter Todd and Mir were exchanging it, scamming each other. And then we were like tweeting, OK, we scammed each other, which is cool. Let's scam each other.
But you're really scamming the state, or you're scamming the blockchain.
At least we're creating a way to scam each other without polluting the blockchain, which is cool. And this way has the additional benefit that in the future, we may use it for Bitcoin itself, which is very, very cool.
So I think to the people who are using Ordinals and not using RGB, do you see a future where they might make the choice to use an RGB over Ordinals to do what they're doing? Is that an outcome that you would like to see?
No, I would like to see the outcome where they just grow up and work instead and get Bitcoin. But if they have to...
But we know people have traded... We know the NFT market has existed now for almost 10 years.
Well, yeah, if you count rare papers, yes. But the kind of hype that we see...
And we know that they're bringing new people into the industry generally.
The crypto industry, not really the Bitcoin.
But you would accept that these are, at least in the public, tangentially rated. When you go on CoinMarketCap, it doesn't tell you that Bitcoin is not crypto.
Yeah, sure. But that's not the metric I want to optimize for. But anyway, if they cannot just find a different, more productive objective in their life, I respect that. And they should use RGB because instead they will not pollute anything. And they will test something that we may use for Bitcoin. So I'm all for it. I will criticize them less. So when I talk with my friends at Diba, I still say them, I don't think this has any actual advantage over a database, but at least you are helping out a protocol that can be used in future for Bitcoin. So we will criticize you more nicely.
Right. So let's talk about that criticism and the public presentation of it. So you, I think, went on stage and you said some certain words about people who do Ordinals, and you sent a certain message. And you would say, I stand behind that message. That was the right message to send to this group of new people who are maybe just interested in Bitcoin for the first time. They're just learning about it. I'm going to send the message to them that what they're doing is very wrong, and that I think that they're morally bad people for doing it.
So I can mention the actual word because I'm Italian, so I can say words.
Well, I am Italian too.
You're right. That's right. So the speech was Ordinals are retarded, and the reason I chose that title was not because I think some of the notions around Ordinals are really stupid, but I used the wordplay of the fact that retarded also means something coming late, because the main point of the speech was not just criticizing, was to explain people that all the narratives around Ordinals were already proposed in 2012, discussed in 2012, and then debunked in 2012, and then abandoned after 2012. So the main point was, this is not new. So don't get scammed by people that tell you this is innovation on Bitcoin. No, this is an idea that in 2012 was innovative. There is this Bitcoin Talk forum post where the guy says, okay, we may just give a number to every Satoshi from the first to the last.
Right.
And so it's basically not new.
Well, so I gave you the counter argument in the private conversation about Silk Road, right? And I said that if you think about Silk Road as an adoption method for Bitcoin, this was the large drug marketplace for Bitcoin, I would say that there were a lot of Bitcoiners from 2013 who came to Bitcoin for that. And I use that as an example because people here, we no longer use Silk Road. Nobody talks about Silk Road. We don't talk about dark markets using Bitcoin. We don't talk about drug markets using Bitcoin. Yet there are a lot of people who onboarded to Bitcoin through that experience, became Bitcoiners, and Silk Road faded and went away. But they stayed within the ecosystem. Do you think that something like that with Ordinals is impossible for some reason? Why? Because the actual, what they're doing is somehow morally bad, or what would be your argument?
Well, it seems symmetrically opposed. Like with Silk Road, you had some people that wanted to buy some things. Some of those were like recreational substances.
Well, they didn't want to buy, so they wanted to buy particularly illegal things. That was
well, illegal, well, some things, books, sometimes Bibles, sometimes marijuana, sometimes other kind of recreative substance, because they just wanted recreative substance, sometimes medical substances. These, there are other people, there were other people trying to hurt them because of their free commerce. So they wanted to physically imprison them for that and hurt them. So the Ross created the marketplace where people can freely choose, and then on the market you may have a forum where people will say, don't use this drug, it's shit. And there were actually counseling on the market saying, this is very addictive, be careful, don't do it, you can do this to detox yourself or to quit. So it was not a promotion. So Ross didn't create a narrative that drugs are great and the methamphetamine will make your life great. They just created a place to exchange stuff. Because this stuff was illegal. What Ordinals did was doing something that was already legal, basically like writing pictures, and using a very scarce, precious asset, which is the Bitcoin blockchain, for no other reason than just technological hype, pseudo-technological hype, presenting as new, as innovative, something that was already possible with just like a Google spreadsheet. So my point is that Silk Road was good. It's not something that we have to accept, but it was bad. It was actually good.
How many people here own Ordinals? Have an Ordinal, they've experienced, they've bought and sold something? Okay, a little few. So we have some people...
Well, I will exit from there, so you will not get me.
You won't be publicly identified. So what do we do now with this attention, right? There are people who are coming to Bitcoin for the first time. This is their first touch point with Bitcoin, is through the Ordinals protocol, maybe it's interfacing with one of these markets. What do we do with these people then? One-to-one, like what would you say to them? How do you get them to be productive for Bitcoin? Because isn't that the goal? We don't want people to be productive for Bitcoin.
Well, let me give you a redemption story. It was 2014, and I was here in Amsterdam, and there was a Bitcoin conference in the docks.
Bitcoin 2014? Yeah.
2014, yeah. And I was here, and there was this like... the biscuit with the honey, something waffle that they said. Well, it was very, very
nice waffle.
Yeah, very nice waffle. And this Ripple stand told me, I cannot give you this biscuit, but I can give you a Ripple token representing the biscuit. If you install the Ripple wallet and you give me back the token, I will give you the biscuit. And I did it many times because it was very good. And then I was a Ripple fan because, I mean, this is faster than Bitcoin. So I was convinced that this just works. I used it, it does work. And then I used that very misguided opinion to learn to be insulted by now friends like the creator of Blockchain Green, Lawrence Naum, met me in Milan, and he told me, you're an idiot, you're just getting scammed. This can be done with a database, there's no innovation here. They're just reusing the name of a real project before Bitcoin. They just bought the name to issue a stupid federation calling it decentralized. So I've been scammed, and I used that to learn and to progress. And of course, I am ashamed of that moment, but it was fine, and the biscuits were very, very good. So just own it and learn and grow and maybe disagree.
Aren't you then validating the same arguments that some of the Bitcoin maximalists have about Ordinals, which is that we can encourage speculative adoption, people will own some Bitcoin, maybe they will get yelled at, but eventually they'll come to Bitcoin for the same reasons you did.
This is similar, though, to let's use the Silk Road with the worst possible example. People using something very bad like methamphetamines, right?
Okay.
On the Silk Road. Maybe they did, then they quit and they stayed with Bitcoin because they had the change that now they're millionaires.
And they have a lot more money.
They have a lot of money. So instead of using this money to buy other meth, they use this money to change their life and to take control of their life. Is methamphetamine their gateway to Bitcoin? Yes, that's good. Is methamphetamine good in general?
Right.
No.
Okay. Interesting. All right, well, we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to kind of round the conversation out. We've seen this explosion, or I guess more interest in Bitcoin technical development of late. We've seen on stage about drive chains, conversation earlier, there's Ordinals, there's BRC20s, BitVM. It seems like the technical community is now more activated and that they're moving directionally in a goal of trying to expand Bitcoin technically, sometimes in ways that are good, sometimes they're bad. How do you look at this? Why do you think this is happening? And where do you think this goes?
So I think this is good. It's not entirely new. It's typical of a bear market. When the speculation side of Bitcoin is lower, the technical aspiration is higher. Many of these things will just be, they call it nerd sniping, like they will just distract people from, like the problem with this innovation is that we have a lot of stuff that works, but not very well and must be finished. So we have to fix Lightning Network. We have to improve multi-sig wallets. We have to do wallet descriptors done right. We have to, I mean, there are so many things, low-hanging fruits to do that are boring, though. While creating the new protocol, the new idea, the new revolution is not boring. For the creator, that's a great psychological satisfaction. So it's great. The problem is that that's not really the kind of work that everybody should be doing if we really want Bitcoin to move forward. If everybody reinvents a new protocol and nobody fixes the protocol, sometimes I hear people saying, okay, like Lightning Network failed in this transaction. It's bad. So instead of, there should be a fix, but nobody is fixing it. So instead, let's create this entirely new protocol, untested idea, which we'll have to start from scratch, from the writing board. So it's just not a constructive approach. Still, it's cool. I think that there is a space for that. BitVM is great. There always be like all the Lightning Network FUD that happened last year during Ordinals. Fees were high, so people were complaining, and Lightning Network was not ready to really satisfy any use case. It still isn't. So people started to have these ideas about dark pools and ARC providers and Enigma network. They are very cool, especially if you want to research, study, imagine the future. And BitVM is another great example because it explains that it will be useless in the short term. I mean,
well,
we should not be overexcited.
Might be a whole other conversation.
Well, yeah, the point is that almost everything is Turing complete in a way. Like we can use the Magic the Gathering cards to create a universal Turing machine. The point is actually how efficient can it be for practical uses. But the fact that you can do that is a good example of the fact that we should never use the attitude that sky is falling. So if we don't do this change to Bitcoin, we are doomed. No. So people will figure it out on top. Like people, when the voice over IP started with Skype, people were saying, if we don't change IP, voice over IP will never work. And then people just started to somehow hack it in, and now we do use not just voice, but everything over IP with these old protocols from the 80s that never changed since the 80s, which is the fundamental IP layer, version 4. Yeah, there is version 6, but nobody cares. So the idea is these innovations are great because they make you understand that we are not doomed, sky is not falling, that there is no like emergency. There is a new thing that needs a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of education, and we really should be patient and active into educating people. We are the free market that will figure it out. The free market will figure it out, but we are the free market. Let's work. Let's not try to reinvent the foundations of civilization every week. I mean, Satoshi did it. Let's do it maybe every 100 years, but let's not reinvent civilization foundations every week.
All right, we'll end it there. Bitcoin getting better slowly, sometimes stupidly, but thanks for the conversation. I'm glad we could have it, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Amsterdam Live Desk, presented by Bitcoin Magazine. I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Joe Hall, Bitcoin journalist, and Ben Charbit of Darewise Entertainment. We just heard a great discussion, maybe a debate discussion, I don't know what it is, from legendary Pete Rizzo and Giacomo Zucco. I'd like your initial thoughts. So, Joe, what was your thought on the discussion that we just heard?
It was great. We were looking forward to some spice, and it delivered. Giacomo always on wonderful form, and Pete really pushing him into places. It was lovely to see two people that I really look up to in the space having a genuine, fun chat about what is quite a controversial topic in the space nowadays.
Definitely. Ben, what are your first thoughts?
Yeah, listen, usually I love debates with Maxis because, as you said, they're spicy. A lot of interesting things come out, but I think this time it really went way beyond the, don't put your graffiti on my money, and really there was some very interesting stories that were brought here. So I think we're going to talk about some really fun stuff, and if you missed it, really go watch it because it was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of really fun stories, I know Rizzo brought up one of the first things is, there was kind of this dichotomy of Ordinals bringing crypto people into Bitcoin or no coiners into Bitcoin because they're finding the fun of NFTs, where we saw really back in 2013 or 2012, the Silk Road bringing drug dealers and drug users into Bitcoin. And while the Silk Road has gone and disappeared, and, free Ross, I just want to shout out to that. But while we've seen the Silk Road collapse and disappear, many of them have stayed for Bitcoin or, Bitcoin is still around. Do you think that Ordinals may collapse and people will still stay in Bitcoin? Or do you think this is more of a flash in the pan and they're not going to stay? Joe, I'll go to you.
Yeah, so I kind of get from that question that Ordinals are kind of like drug dealers. is that where we're going?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, I'd love your thoughts.
I mean, that's the thing, right? That everything is good for Bitcoin. And yes, we're in Amsterdam, which is obviously a very liberal state with regards to drugs, or, marijuana is legal here. But yeah, the fact that Silk Road was one of the first use cases for Bitcoin is fascinating, but it was also kind of terrible, right? Because a lot of people in the mainstream think that Bitcoin is bad because it's used by, wow, it's really kicking off behind us, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Is used by, bad people in society, it's just drugs, right? But yeah, whether or not the Ordinals thing, I'm kind of losing my thought as I'm being distracted by what's behind me. Could you repeat the question, sorry?
Yeah, so do you think that drugs and Ordinals are like a flash in the pan for bringing people in? So drugs or drug users were using Bitcoin in order to get drugs, or do you see it as more as Ordinals being basically the gateway drug into Bitcoin? Maybe a healthier way into Bitcoin.
No, and it's an attractive narrative, right? The idea that, oh, look, it's good for adoption because we've got all these people wearing wizards costumes and going in the showers and doing videos and things. But I've not interacted personally with people that have been brought into Bitcoin in that way, other than the occasional bit of Twitter sphere banter, so I can't really comment properly. I think that might be a better question for our friend over in the corner.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to chime in. The first thing that I also want to emphasize here is that, it would be good to stop always bringing back these stories of, drug dealing and black market, because we have to get rid of this this prejudice now that people are still that we're still kind of carrying when it comes to Bitcoin. The point is, for some of us who are really interested in massive adoption, then I think your question is very relevant. We're not there yet, absolutely. I don't think that right now you have a lot of adoption of Bitcoin that's coming from Ordinals, but I think this is the plan. This is the point. Ordinal is bringing culture to Bitcoin when Bitcoin was mostly used so far as an infrastructure to transfer value. Now we can actually build experiences, build entertainment, content, culture. So I think this is exactly the plan, but we're still at the very beginning.
Definitely. It was brought up, Giacomo kept saying, don't, if you're going to scam people, just don't waste my precious block space, is kind of what he was saying. Well, we see Bitcoin as permissionless, and, you can do things, whether it's, you can use Bitcoin however you want, even under the guise of authoritarian governments or oppressive companies that we've seen centralized over that, whether it's social media platforms. So Giacomo was kind of like this tongue-in-cheek, like, you can scam people as long as it's not on the precious blockchain space. But do we see that the free markets end up pricing out Ordinals? Obviously, Ordinals kind of started in January of this year, and we saw a spike in transaction fees in the mempool, or transactions and fees spiked in the mempool. But now that we've kind of seen them die down, a lot of the mempool is cleared out. Is it kind of like, you can scream into the ether, pun intended, all you want, but it's not going to matter at the end of the day because Bitcoin is free and permissionless. Joe, over to you. So do you think people can use Bitcoin however they want?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of to Ben's point as well. Is this culture sticking around in a meaningful way? I mean, you saw Pete ask the audience just there, how many people have minted an Ordinal here? And I guess 10 people put up their hand.
Yeah.
It felt like the vast majority have never minted an ordinal.
I think a lot of them were hiding, maybe, but you know.
But why would they hide? Like the debate was
true.
called the Ordinals Debate, and the people that were in the audience would, you'd imagine, have some sort of inclination or affinity with ordinals. I've like Bitcoin culture. You know, it's this great encompassing word. It goes from everything from like carnivore maxis to like vegan eco warriors. You know, there's no discernible Bitcoin culture. If ordinals is another aspect of Bitcoin culture, fantastic. If it does bring people into learning what money is, what sound money is, and that sort of thing, or if they're just using it as a tool to make themselves more productive with their lives, fantastic, all power to them. But I think that the ordinals is a lot of hot air and a lot of marketing and a lot of like big name Bitcoin influencers being like, look how good I'm doing, look all this amazing work I'm doing for the community. And you know, makes you wonder, like, is that maybe perhaps, you know, virtue signaling? Is it going in that direction? You know, is the ordinals sort of seen, is it virtue signaling?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. Ben, so what are your thoughts on the way the community's been, or is this virtue signaling basically to get people onto Bitcoin?
So the first thing is Giacomo was still very respectful of freedom, and I think it's important to mention it, that this is the whole point, right? Everything is permissionless, fully decentralized, and that's the virtue of Bitcoin. Now, when we take a little step back and look at the big picture, Bitcoin is the largest, you know, it's the prestige chain. Of course, it's the best consensus layer, but also on top of that, it's the largest liquidity, it's the biggest number of non-zero wallets. So, of course, there's an opportunity here to service all of these wallets with utility. So, you know, this debate over, you know, scamming, not scamming, like the point, I think, is that it's really this kind of cultural battle between, do we want to find ways, whatever they are, to drive adoption to Bitcoin? And I think that maxis, who are the ones who really believe in the ethos, exactly like Giacomo, right, which is there's a centralized banking system which is evil and we're trying to get away from this, well, then let's use whatever proxies we can to drive users to it. And actually, it's interesting because we realize, if you look back in the history, culture was always one of the best vessels for that. Ordinals is just one way to do it. And Giacomo reminded a few interesting things, like the fact that, you know, an ordinal is just an inscription protocol, something that you could already do before. So the technology, in a way, is just a commodity here.
Yeah. Giacomo said, yeah, like, we want to be like an Amish community, so that's maybe pigeonholing the Bitcoin community, saying being Amish, this is the way, there's no change. Where Rizzo is more of like, we should bring some of the crypto native things or good ideas into Bitcoin, where Giacomo seems to be more in the ossification camp of like, Bitcoin's good enough, it is the way it is. So Joe, I'd love your thoughts. Do we need to ossify, or is there ways that we can accept more things and expand them into Bitcoin?
Oh gosh, neither of those sort of metaphors. I'm not Amish, and I'm not an Amish person with an internet connection. I think that, you know, we don't need to put ourselves down into these sort of groups. Right? We're still. I know Bitcoin's 14 years old. I know that this has been going for some time. We've got some meaningful levels of adoption right now. It's legal tender in El Salvador. Most people recognize the Bitcoin B. But at the same time, I don't think we need to be like, with this, with that. Let's just let it sort of play out. And I'm going to be like quite standoffish with my opinion on this sort of matter for what it is. And yeah, I mean, ossification, it's a big word that's bounded around a lot within the Bitcoin community, and I'm not technical minded. I'm not technically experienced enough to give a full answer on whether or not we should ossify or not. Bitcoin is good enough for me at a technical level, but you know, we're seeing with BitVM and, you know, Robin's new protocol that there are clearly ways in which we can push Bitcoin further without doing a soft fork. So that's fantastic, right? Yeah. But I mean, would you call that an ossification strategy, even that it's not a soft fork?
I don't know. I guess I'm undecided. I do think that there's things that we could do with like BitVM, like you brought up, or even I know CTV is kind of making its rounds away. We had a discussion about BIP 300. Personally, I'm not a big fan of BIP 300, but you know, there's ways for debate for, you know, whether it should be implemented or not. Yeah. I do think that maybe we should ossify around certain things. Like I'm a hard believer in 21 million for forever for Bitcoin, and then even Peter Todd brought up like, you know, he was bringing up are tail emissions enough or all of that. That's something that I'm also against. But I guess it's kind of us as a community, even though it's 14 years old, we're still kind of finding our niche. And Ben, kind of going to your point of like mass adoption, we're obviously trying to grow and expand. I'd love to hear your final thoughts on just like the community as a whole. How do we grow for mass adoption?
Yeah, again, I am not one of these old Bitcoiners and who was there for the technology or original there for the ethos. I discovered this later. I'm a fully convinced one now. And of course, what I care about is whatever avenues we can explore to really increase adoption. So I still believe that we should not really change the consensus layer, because that's the beauty of it. It's simple in a way, and so it's probably its best value today that it's very different from the others, and it's protected against change, and thanks to its decentralized nature. But we can build on top of it, and so I think that's a way maybe to bring these different communities together in a middle ground, where there are avenues to explore where we don't have to be that disruptive and still try to create other opportunities to grow. And because, my mother, when she'll eventually join, she will not really care about everything that we just spoke. Yeah. She will.
All right, that was a great discussion, guys. We're heading back to the main stage now. Stick with us.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.